Firefighters froze for a split second, recognizing the warning every rescue team fears. The structure was starting to collapse. Inside the smoke-filled apartment, visibility was nearly zero. Heat pressed down like a crushing weight, burning lungs with every breath. The exit was no longer clear. The hallway that had been there moments before was now half gone, swallowed by debris and fire. Somewhere inside, a child was still trapped. Firefighters shouted commands through radios filled with static. Retreat was imminent. The order to pull back was seconds away. That's when the dog moved, not toward the exit, not toward safety. He turned back toward the child. As the ceiling groaned again, and part of the wall caved inward, he could barely breathe. The dog didn't hesitate. Bricks crashed down behind them. Smoke swallowed everything. And still, the dog stayed. When the building started to collapse, the dog didn't run. He protected the child. Before we begin, subscribe to Four-Legged Heroes for more emotional stories inspired by real rescue work, where courage comes on four legs and every second can change a life. This story is a fictional rescue narrative inspired by real firefighter K-9 operations. While the events, characters, and setting are dramatized, the dangers, decisions, and behaviors shown reflect what rescue dogs and firefighters face in real emergencies. This is not a documentary or a reenactment of a specific real incident. The fire had already taken control of the building before help arrived. A young child had become separated during the evacuation. Scent and sound, and to make decisions without hesitation. They are taught not only to search, but to protect. As the building began to fail, every choice carried consequences. Firefighters knew that sending the dog inside meant trusting instinct over visibility, training over fear. No one knew how much time remained. No one knew if the structure would hold long enough. What they did know was simple, and in the moments that followed, that trust would be tested in the most dangerous way possible. The fire didn't announce itself with drama. It began quietly, the way most disasters do, hidden, unnoticed, growing stronger in the dark. When the first emergency calls came in, residents were already fleeing down narrow corridors, coughing, disoriented, terrified. Outside, sirens filled the street. Every step forward felt heavier than the last. The stairwell was choked with smoke. Flames curled along the ceiling, feeding on exposed beams. Visibility dropped to nearly nothing. Heat pressed down like a physical force. That's when a firefighter noticed something small near the wall. A backpack. Possible child's belongings found. Second floor. If conditions allow. They pushed forward, down a hallway where paint blistered and peeled from the walls. Past doors warped by heat. Each breath burned despite the protection of their masks. Then the structure shuddered. A low, violent groan rippled through the building, followed by a sharp crack overhead. Dust rained down, forcing firefighters to shield their heads instinctively. That sound changed everything. Ceiling integrity compromised, someone reported. We're losing stability, the captain assessed quickly. He had seen this before. They hadn't seen movement. The building continued to burn violently, flames now visible through multiple windows. That's when the rescue dog arrived. He stepped down from the truck calmly, unfazed by the noise, the heat, or the shouting crowd. His movements were controlled, his eyes focused. This environment didn't confuse him, it activated him. He knelt briefly in front of the dog, resting his helmeted forehead against the dog's head. The dog's tail moved once. Inside the building, the dog immediately lowered his head, reading the smoke like a map. Every scent told a story: burned wood, chemicals, human fear, and beneath it all, something else. A child. Firefighters watched as the dog moved through the first floor quickly, then slowed near the base of the second floor stairwell. His posture changed, his head lifted. His ears angled forward. He stopped. The handler felt it instantly through the line. "He's got something," he said. "Line only," the captain ordered. "No further." Then he felt something move. Warm, solid. He looked up weakly. A dog stood in front of him. The dog lowered himself immediately, blocking the falling ash and debris from above. Another violent crack echoed as part of the ceiling collapsed nearby, sending dust and fragments raining down. The child screamed silently, frozen in fear. The handler felt the line stop moving. "He's stationary," he said. That meant one thing. The dog had found the child and was staying with him. The dog didn't move. Firefighters outside watched sections of the building begin to sag. Flames surged through broken windows, licking upward as the structure began to fail. "Collapse imminent," a voice shouted. The captain clenched his jaw. They had seconds. The building shook again harder this time. A deep, grinding sound rolled through the structure, like something enormous shifting its weight. The floor trembled beneath the firefighters' boots outside, and a cloud of dust burst from the upper windows as part of the interior gave way. "Collapse progressing," someone shouted. The vibration traveled through his paws, through the floor, through the walls. Instinct took over. He widened his stance, lowering his body even more, turning himself into a shield. The child whimpered, coughing violently, his small hands clutching at the dog's vest. "I'm scared," the boy whispered, voice barely audible. The dog pressed closer, placing his body over the child's chest and shoulders, blocking falling debris as pieces of plaster and wood rained down around them. Outside, the handler felt the line vibrate sharply, then go taut. "He's bracing," the handler said. "He's protecting the child." The captain's face hardened. "How stable is that corridor?" A firefighter shook his head. "It's not. We're seconds away from losing it." The captain glanced at the building, then back at the handler. A beam shifted, then fell, missing them by inches. The dog flinched but held position, his muscles locked, breathing controlled despite the smoke tearing at his lungs. "He's calming him." They had seen it before. Rescue dogs were trained not just to find, but to manage panic to keep victims from moving when movement could be deadly. The handler tightened his grip on the line, fighting the urge to pull. "Buddy," he said softly, knowing the dog couldn't hear him. "Stay, just stay." The building answered with another violent shudder. A section of the wall behind the dog collapsed inward, sending a blast of heat and smoke forward. The dog shifted instantly, repositioning his body to block the new opening, turning his back to the flames so the child wouldn't face them. Pain flared through him as heat scorched his vest. Still, he stayed. The child's coughing grew weaker. The dog reacted immediately, nudging the boy's face upward. Thermal cameras scanned desperately, images flickering uselessly as heat overwhelmed the sensors. "I've lost visual," the operator said. "Too much fire." Time was nearly gone. Then the dog made a subtle shift. He didn't move away. "Can he move the child?" The handler hesitated. "If the structure holds, maybe." The boy tried to crawl, but cried out as debris pinned part of his leg. The dog froze again. Another crack thundered overhead. Outside, firefighters took a step back as the building lurched violently. "We're losing it," someone shouted. The captain raised his voice. "Prepare for full collapse." Inside the corridor, the dog made a decision. He shifted his body sideways, wedging himself between a fallen beam and the floor. Using his back and shoulders, he pushed slowly, painfully creating just enough space for the child's leg to slide free. The child screamed, then gasped as air rushed into his lungs. The dog barked again, urgent now. "Now," the handler whispered. The dog pulled gently at the child's jacket, guiding him inch by inch toward the opening. Debris continued to fall. Smoke thickened. Heat surged. They were moving, but barely. Outside, the line began to slide through the handler's hands. "He's coming back," the handler said, voice breaking. "He's bringing him." Firefighters surged forward instinctively, ready to grab them the moment they appeared. He repositioned again, pressing himself over the child, absorbing the impact as chunks of plaster and brick crashed down around them. Pain flared. His breath hitched, but the child was still moving. They stumbled backward as fire roared through the opening. The building was finished. On the pavement, the child collapsed, coughing violently but alive. Medics rushed in. The dog collapsed beside him, chest heaving, eyes still alert. The building behind them collapsed moments later, sending a shockwave through the street. If the dog had moved even seconds earlier, no one finished the thought, because they didn't need to. A violent roar shook the ground as the building finally gave in on itself. Walls folding inward, floors pancaking down in a cloud of dust, fire, and debris. Firefighters instinctively turned away, shielding their faces as heat and ash washed over them. When the noise faded, the street fell into a strange silence. The building was gone. In its place stood a smoking ruin, twisted and unrecognizable. The fire had won, but not completely. On the pavement, the child lay curled on his side, coughing violently as medics worked around him. Oxygen was placed over his face. Gentle hands checked his pulse, his breathing, his responsiveness. "Stay with me," a paramedic said calmly. "You're safe now." They were red, glossy, filled with confusion and fear. He tried to speak, but couldn't. His gaze drifted instead past the flashing lights. Soot covered his fur, and small burns marked his vest and paws. One of his boots was missing entirely. The handler dropped to his knees beside him, hands shaking as he checked the harness, the line, the dog's breathing. "Easy," he whispered. "You're out. It's over." The dog didn't respond with sound. Instead, his tail moved once, slow, weak. Enough. A firefighter knelt nearby, removing his helmet with trembling hands. "I've never seen that," he said quietly. "No one has," another replied. The captain stood a few steps back, staring at the ruins of the building. He had made hundreds of calls in his career, some good, some devastating. But this one would stay with him forever. They had been seconds away from ordering a full retreat, seconds away from pulling the dog out, seconds away from losing the child. He turned toward the handler and the dog. "That dog made the call," he said. "Not us." Medics carefully lifted the child onto a stretcher. As they did, the boy reached out weakly, fingers trembling. "Wait," he whispered hoarsely. The paramedic leaned close. "What is it, sweetheart?" The boy pointed toward the dog. "He stayed," the boy said. "He didn't leave me." The handler felt his throat tighten. The dog lifted his head just enough to meet the child's eyes. For a moment, nothing else existed. Not the collapsed building, not the fire, not the sirens. Just a child and the animal that had refused to abandon him. Then the dog's strength finally gave out. His head dropped back onto the pavement, body going slack as exhaustion overtook adrenaline. "Dog's down," someone shouted. His breathing steadied slightly under the oxygen. "He's alive," the medic confirmed. Smoke inhalation and burns, but he's breathing. Relief rippled through the scene like a wave. This time they had beaten it. He climbed into the veterinary unit. Inside, the lights were harsh and bright. The dog lay still, oxygen hissing softly. The dog's eyes opened slowly. He looked around, disoriented for a moment. Then he looked at the handler. Firefighters packed up equipment. Police moved the crowd back. The city resumed its relentless motion. But for those who had been there, nothing felt the same. At the hospital, Doctors moved quickly. The child was rushed into treatment for smoke inhalation and minor injuries from falling debris. "He's going to be okay," a doctor said finally. "Scared, exhausted, but okay." His knees nearly gave out. In the veterinary ward, the dog was treated for burns and smoke inhalation. 4 fluids were started. His paws were cleaned and bandaged. His vest was cut away carefully. He pushed himself far past normal limits, the veterinarian said. "He wasn't going to leave," he said. "Not without that kid." The veterinarian looked at the dog with quiet respect. "Then he's exactly the kind of dog this job needs." Outside the window, dawn began to creep into the sky, washing the city in pale light. Another fire, another night, another narrow escape. But this one would be remembered. Because when the building started to collapse, when fear and fire closed in from every direction, a dog chose not to run. He chose to stand still. And in doing so, he gave a child his future back. The first morning after the fire felt unreal, illuminating streets that only hours earlier had been filled with smoke, sirens, and fear. Commuters passed by the burned-out shell of the building, slowing just enough to stare before moving on. New York never stopped for long. But inside the hospital, time moved differently. The child lay in a narrow bed, wrapped in white sheets that felt too clean compared to the darkness he remembered. Machines hummed softly around him, tracking breaths and heartbeats. His lungs still burned when he inhaled deeply, but the worst had passed. A nurse adjusted his oxygen mask gently. "You did great." The child closed his eyes, relief softening his face. Bandages wrapped his paws. His fur had been cleaned, but the smell of smoke still lingered faintly. Every few minutes, he checked the dog's breathing, even though the monitors told him everything he needed to know. Old habits were hard to break. "You scared me," he murmured softly. The dog's ear twitched, but he didn't wake. The veterinarian returned with an update. "He'll need rest," she said. "No work for a while. Smoke inhalation takes time to heal, and the burns on his paws will be sensitive." The handler nodded. "That's fine," he said. "He's earned it." Later that day, the captain arrived. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, helmet tucked under his arm, unsure how to act in a place that didn't smell like smoke or sound like chaos. "He saved that kid," the captain said finally. The handler looked up. "He did his job." The captain shook his head slowly. "No, he did more than that." He stepped closer, resting a hand gently on the dog's shoulder. "I've been doing this a long time," he continued. "I've seen bravery, I've seen sacrifice, but what he did in that building, he made a choice." The handler swallowed. "So did you," he said quietly. The captain met his eyes. "Yeah," he replied, "and I'll carry that choice with me forever." Word of the rescue spread through the department quickly. Firefighters stopped by between shifts, some still smelling of smoke from other calls. They spoke in low voices, respectful, as if they were in a sacred place. They didn't need to be told what had happened. They knew. Across the hall, the child's mother sat at his bedside, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup that had gone cold long ago. She watched her son sleep, chest rising and falling steadily, each breath a small miracle. When a nurse asked if she needed anything, she shook her head. "I just want to see the dog," she said finally. Arrangements were made carefully. Infection control, timing, safety. That evening, the handler gently guided the dog, still weak, but alert, on a slow walk down the hall. The dog's paws were tender, his steps cautious, but his focus sharpened as they approached the child's room. He stopped at the doorway. Inside, the child opened his eyes. For a moment, neither moved. Then the child smiled. "That's him," he whispered. "That's the dog." The handler knelt, allowing the dog to lie down near the bed. The child reached out slowly, fingers brushing the dog's fur. "You stayed with me," he said softly. The dog let out a quiet sigh, tail moving once against the floor. The child's mother covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to thank you." The handler shook his head gently. "You don't need to," he said. He'd do it again, and everyone in the room knew that was true. Over the next few days, recovery continued. The child grew stronger, laughter slowly replacing fear. His nightmares faded with reassurance and time. Doctors cleared his lungs. Physical therapists helped him move without pain. The dog healed too. Bandages came off one by one. Burns faded. His breathing improved. He began to wag his tail more, to lift his head when footsteps passed, to watch the door like he always had. Still working, always ready. But something had changed. Firefighters noticed it immediately when the dog finally returned to the station weeks later. He moved with the same discipline, the same focus. But when he passed the locker with the burned vest, now hung carefully inside a glass case, he paused, just for a second. Then he moved on. The handler watched him closely. "You remember," he murmured. The dog didn't respond. He didn't need to, because remembering wasn't about fear. It was about meaning. The fire had taken a building. It had taken possessions. It had taken peace. But it had not taken lives. Because in the moment when everything fell apart, when walls collapsed and fear took over, one dog chose to become something more than a rescuer. He became a shield. And for one child, that choice meant everything. Weeks passed, but the fire never fully left the people who lived through it. The building was gone, reduced to rubble and ash, cleared away piece by piece until only an empty lot remained. Soon, something new would rise there. That was the way cities survived, by rebuilding over the scars. But for one child, and for one dog, that place would always exist, not as ruins, but as a moment. The child returned home slowly, carefully, with lungs still healing and memories that came back in pieces. Loud noises startled him. The smell of smoke even from a kitchen made his chest tighten. Some nights he woke up gasping, convinced the ceiling was coming down again. And every time his mother sat beside him, holding his hand until the fear passed. "What did the dog do?" she asked once gently, when the boy was ready to talk. The child thought for a long moment. "He didn't run," he said finally. "He stayed." That was how he explained it to everyone. Doctors, therapists, family members who asked how he survived. The dog stayed. Across town, at the firehouse, life returned to routine. Alarms rang. Trucks rolled out. Fires were fought. Lives were saved, and sometimes lost. The rhythm of the job didn't slow down for long, but the dog's presence had changed something. Firefighters watched him with new eyes, not as a tool or an asset, but as a partner who had made a decision no command could give. When the handler finally cleared him for light duty, the dog walked back into the station like he always had, head high, calm, focused. His paws still showed faint scars. His breathing was steady, but slower than before. He was older now, not in years, in experience. The burned vest was mounted inside a glass case near the entrance. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. No plaque explained it in detail. Just a simple line beneath it. He stayed. Firefighters passed it every day. Some paused, some didn't, but everyone knew what it meant. Months later, on a quiet afternoon, the firehouse received a visit. A small boy stepped inside, holding his mother's hand tightly. He hesitated at the door, eyes scanning the unfamiliar space filled with equipment, sounds, and unfamiliar faces. Then he saw the dog. The dog lifted his head. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then the dog's tail wagged. The boy smiled wide, unguarded, real. "That's him," the boy said. The handler knelt beside the dog, unclipping the leash. The boy approached slowly, carefully, like he was afraid the moment might disappear if he moved too fast. He knelt and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. The dog stayed still, just like he had that night. "Thank you," the boy whispered into his fur. Firefighters nearby turned away quietly, giving them space. The mother wiped her eyes. "You didn't just save his life," she said to the handler. "You gave him back his courage." The handler shook his head gently. "He gave it to himself," he said. "We just helped." The dog didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling, and that was enough. As years passed, the story became part of the firehouse's history. New firefighters heard it during training. Young recruits listened closely, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. It wasn't about strength. It wasn't about orders. It was about instinct, trust, and the moment someone chooses to stand between danger and another life. The dog eventually retired. His steps grew slower. His muzzle turned gray. His days became quieter short walks, long naps, the steady presence of the handler who had never left his side. On his last day at the station, there were no speeches, just hands resting on his head, just quiet respect. The handler took him home. Years later, when the dog was gone, the handler returned to the firehouse alone. The glass case was still there. The vest still hung inside, and beneath it, the same words remained. He stayed because some acts of courage don't need long explanations. This story is a fictional narrative inspired by real rescue dogs who work beside firefighters around the world, dogs trained not only to search, but to protect. Dogs who move forward when humans must stop. Dogs who listen when no one else can hear. It is not about one specific dog. It is about all of them. And it is about the moments that define who we are, not when everything is easy, but when everything is falling apart, when walls collapse, when fear takes over, when escape is possible, but someone else still needs help. In those moments, heroes are not always the ones who run fastest. Sometimes they are the ones who stay, and sometimes they have 4 legs.